I'm Ilinca. As my last name would indicate, I am from Romania, but I live in the Netherlands for the past almost 10 years, give or take. And I work for another company that nobody has ever heard of. I don't know if that was somehow a prerequisite, except for PwC. We've all heard of PwC. So first of all, we have a funny name. Ask me why we're called that, perhaps at the dinner tonight. But what we do is that we help people work better by creating places that actually work better for them. So in effect, we design offices and we also manufacture the furniture. But to do that, we do a lot of research. So what I'll spend the next 20 minutes or so telling you a bit about is the insights from our latest global report around what people need and expect from their workplace experience. And if you're interested and not too bored with me after this session at 2 something, Tom will tell us the exact time depending on how late we are, there's going to be a breakout session where I'll build on these insights from the global report around what people need and expect from their workplace into very practical, 3 practical things, 3 lenses, as I like to call them, around what each of your companies can do to deliver a workplace experience that fits what people are telling us. Now, let's see if the second part works. So I'll preface what I'll say with 2 disclaimers. Disclaimer number 1 is that a hybrid work policy, which most of you, I think, have to some extent, will never, ever, ever, ever work unless the space changes with it. So I think, Rakesh, I know you've been picked on a lot today. I don't know if you're still in the room, but you mentioned yesterday morning that any sort of technology or software is a tool. It's a means to an end. It's the same with space, right? If everything else is not super clear, starting with what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to increase cross-pollination, which some of you actually mentioned in your presentations? Are you trying to create more authentic leadership? Space and tools are what we call enablers, but without processes and culture, which is just behavior over time and it's driven by processes, it's not going to work. So I'm talking about space today, but being very mindful that it's part of an ecosystem. And in the afternoon session, I'll talk a little bit more about what this work experience model means. So that's disclaimer number 1. Disclaimer number 2, and it's because I'm getting this question everywhere I travel to, is what is the future of the office? I have no idea. I'm not a fortune teller. What we are in Steelcase are kind of like nerdy office anthropologists, right? So we can tell you what the pulse is on what people are telling us today, what leaders are telling us, what employees are telling us. We build frameworks around how you can design your own space, but there's no such thing as the one thing that will fix everything, especially because space by itself won't actually be able to do that. Am I still drifting in and out when I'm speaking? Okay. So no better way to start a presentation than by stating the obvious. But I think all of us can agree on the fact that 2020 was completely insane. 2021 didn't get any better. 2022 was creepy. Well, 2023, I have to say, we're all threading carefully from many, many aspects, both in the real world and in the financial world. And when it comes to the world of workplace and the world of work, I think the starting point is to acknowledge that we've even changed the vocabulary, right, in terms of impact and our ability to adapt. So I don't know how many of you, the first one is already an acronym. Once it's an acronym, you know it's there to stay, RTO. I don't know how many of you are using that, but all of these things, maybe you spoke about it briefly 3 years ago, but now it's basically dinner conversation. But more importantly, because people kept coming back in most of the sessions so far, I think what's important to establish as a baseline is the impact on what this 3-year, let's say, I don't even know how to describe it, to be honest, right? We've all lived it, right? It keeps on giving, but in terms of the shit show. Cool, got it. I think that's very much well, in a show that hopefully ends at season 3. Right? You know, if you have too many seasons in a show, you know it's not going in the right direction. So this is just a summary of the way we can look at how all of our relationship to work has changed as a result of everything that's happening. Highly encourage you to ask ChatGPT about each of them because it's a very nice rabbit hole into each of them. But in super short, number 1, maybe the most obvious one to some extent. We don't trust each other at work as much as we did before the pandemic, because we don't know each other as well as we did before the pandemic. So, of course, that's a generalization, right? But it is evidence-based. I think this American newspaper, The Atlantic, even calls it a trust recession, because I know we need more types of recessions, but in the end, trust is to innovation, and innovation doesn't have to be inventing the newest thing. Innovation can be process innovation. Trust is to innovation like alcohol is to weddings, right? It's gonna be fun, but probably it's not gonna go as well as if you actually had a bit of, it's social lubricant, because at work we need social capital. It's to innovate, you need to trust each other, you need to come up with new ideas, you need to be comfortable with failing and all of these things. And the reality is that if you've met this person once on Zoom, and maybe they're having a bad day, and now you don't trust Jeff anymore, right? But Jeff is an integral part of your ability to actually deliver value to the company. So that's one aspect of how our relationship to work has changed. Another aspect is the fact that more than ever, and again, it's not me talking, right? It's quite a bit of research behind it, that more than ever, we don't just want a job anymore. Right, maybe 15 years ago, we weren't as concerned with the social political stance that your company will take on a war or on DEI or on the environment. But in a nutshell, the voice of the employee, I think, hasn't been louder, or it's now louder than ever before. So I don't know when, of course, the war broke out, how many of your colleagues or yourself immediately started asking your leaders questions. So what are we doing? Are we leaving? Are we staying? You know, that I think is more than ever the case. And last but not least, I heard hire to retire this morning. I think that's less and less looking like it's likely, right? Doesn't mean it's not possible, but this notion of loyalty, so basically, again, statistically speaking, more than ever, at least in recorded, surveyed history, people are either quitting or thinking about quitting. I don't even know what's worse, right? I think perhaps thinking about quitting and not actually quitting could be more detrimental to a company. So I'm saying all of these things to kind of set the stage for the fact that it's those companies that will understand why an employee decides to stay, go, or is engaged or not engaged are the ones that are going to be more successful, which is why we spend a lot of time doing research. So since the pandemic started, we were doing research before the pandemic, of course, but since the pandemic started, we've been doing more frequent research. So every 3 months, we do leadership surveys and interviews and employee survey and interviews. Before you ask me, one of the 11 countries is not Poland. Unfortunately, none of the Central Eastern European countries are at the moment included in our study. However, based on conversations I've had on a weekly basis, because I cover the Central European region for Steelcase, you know, it doesn't apply to everyone because that's not the point of global research, right? It's to get you thinking around the insights. But I get this question a lot, and I just wanted to anticipate it. So every 3 months we take the pulse. You're seeing now something that, let's say in April, will be updated again. So this is November, December results that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so what is it this lady is talking about? So the first thing maybe to establish as a baseline, second, let me state the obvious, is that of course the future is hybrid. This is part of the leadership survey. The reason why I'm showing this slide is just to set the context in terms of how this evolved, especially the extremes, right? So at the moment, what this says is that 3% of the leaders in our study believe that the future is primarily working from home. Before the pandemic, this was at 2%. Then year one, we're like, this kind of sucks. But it went up to 5%, right? Leaders were like, this, maybe. Year two, we were very confident. Like, this can work. I will never leave my house. I have my cat. I have my socks. 14% of leaders. And basically now it's fluctuated a bit, but it went back down to more or less pre-pandemic levels. So it's clear that leadership does believe that there is space for the office, and so do employees. So the question we asked is, how much time, or how many of you are planning on spending some time in the office, and how much time is that? So between 1 and 5 days, I'm not going to show the breakdown between number of days because it always gets very contentious. And I have to say that psychologically, whenever you ask a question like that, it's very tricky because I'm going to try to maintain control, right? I won't tell you 5 because what if I don't want it to be 5 and then I've accidentally entered into a social contract I cannot get myself out of. And I'm sure that a lot of your companies did ask you that question. And I think the people that asked you those questions 2 years ago are very much regretting asking you that question. But the point here is not that it's so many people that are saying that the office, that they want to have access to space, to a workplace in the future. It's more that, so, hey, employer, keep the office. I might be there 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days a week. Who knows? But I don't really want to go. Right, so almost half are saying, but I still prefer to work from my house. 1/3 are like, don't care. And 21 are on average saying they prefer to work from the office. So this is very tricky, not only for the obvious reason that most of your companies have underutilized real estate, but also, and this is the first finding, if you will, of our research, is that liking to work from your office actually has an impact on engagement, on how connected you are to culture, on your productivity, less so, right? And here I'll make a little parenthesis. This is self-reported individual productivity. Me, I'm faster at my emails, right? I'm faster at whatever process it is that I'm doing, but there's no way to assess through a survey collective productivity. Nobody has seen me for 5 months. Therefore, the people that have been hired have never gotten to meet me, have never gotten to see my perspective, etc. So that's me talking, not the research, but I think there's something to the productivity part, and also less likely to leave. So the first thing is that organizations and all of us and all of you should care about the preference that your people have about coming to the office or not. And I know this is super small, but I don't think the details matter that much, but we of course didn't only ask them about liking their office, right? We asked them a whole bunch of other things because otherwise that would be a very flawed survey, but we compared the impact on engagement, connection to culture, productivity, and retention with other things like money, commute, how long you've worked with the company, your ability to work remotely, so quite a few other things. And with the exception of retention, so likelihood to stay with the company, where a bigger predictor of retention was, I've already been here for 15 years, so tenure, right, was significantly higher of a predictor. For all the other ones, liking to work from your office was even more important than commute or income or tenure or anything like that. Is that surprising to you? Are you still with me? It's too small. But are you surprised that, for example, liking to work from your office is a higher predictor of engagement than income? Oh, no, I forgot the sequence of the slides. So I think a few slides from now, we'll see some research from McKinsey that is emphasizing the fact that there's a huge gap between what employees actually want and what their employers think they want in terms of weight, right? I'm not saying that income doesn't matter, or I know I'm being recorded, so that's not the point. But okay, insight number one is that liking to work from your office matters, and it matters, or it can matter even more than other things. And surprisingly enough, and this is the second takeaway from our study, is that, and this is a brain twister, right? When I heard this the first time from our research team, I was like, are you sure? So the people in our study are saying that they're willing to trade remote workdays in exchange for, well, assigned workspaces. Very counterintuitive, right? Because this past 2 or 3 years were all about, we want flexibility, we want to be able to choose everything about our ability to come to the office, but we're human, right? So We need things like belonging, and belonging as a mammal generally has a form of territoriality in it, right? I want to know where my stuff is, where the people that I know are at. So forget that it's a signed desk. Of course, you need to ask something that everyone understands, but just ownership, right? That's the primary thing here. First of all, and second of all, we like predictability as well. If you don't like predictability, I would love to talk to you, but generally as humans or as mammals, we like to know what's going to happen next. And knowing that you have a space that you can call your own if you make the decision to go to the office is human and natural. But a bit counterintuitive, especially for leaders. So this is just showing that, yeah, at home, we do have this level of ownership. It's probably not perfect, and it's a little corner in your kitchen table, right? But this notion of ownership is something that we've had quite a bit over the last 2 years. I'm not talking ergonomics or et cetera, but, and then you go to the office and it's like, nobody owns anything, you don't know where to go. And at a macro level, of course, because this notion that, you know, it's all about unassigned because all you want to do is have the flexibility of coming or not coming, that means that in the office, now, most assigned workstations have virtually disappeared, right? And it's now basically just a sea of, it's unassigned, right? Because we can't predict who comes when into the office, which completely takes away this notion of, we're calling it choice and control, right? Which is, again, a very human thing that has to do with predictability, has to do with belonging and territoriality. So that's the second takeaway, right? That this need for belonging or for ownership that we have as people, we don't want it to conflict with our need for flexibility. But it does, right? Because it's the easiest thing to do is just to remove more assigned desking. And last but not least, this is the third one, maybe less of a surprise because of the second one, but if you were to Google future of the office all through 2021 and 2022, the consensus was, not evidence-based necessarily, that the future of the office is all about collaboration. You will focus at home, or you will do your alone work at home. Whereas that's not really what people, at least the people in our study, are saying. And I mean, you are able to separate alone work at home versus together work in the office. However, we're still human, we're still mammals, and we need variety. So creativity or any kind of problem solving, right? Because in finance functions and all of the functions that you have within each of your GBS, shared service centers, et cetera, there is a form of creativity and problem solving, of course, required regardless of how process-driven that work actually is. You can separate it, but should you? Because when you come up with a problem, you need to think, then you have a conversation, then you need to probably think again. And if this decision was made for you, you only come to collaborate, there's quite a few risks involved. Because what if all of a sudden you need to do focus work in the office? Are you going to go home? Or maybe you can't actually focus in the office. And alone work is also more things than just sitting at your desk. It's, I don't know how many hours of calls you guys have every day. I'm at 5 on average. Definitely need to reduce that, but I won't really return to an office. You will bring me in with the collaboration part, but I won't return systematically if I can't also have my calls. And not in a room of 12 people, for example, where it just looks a bit odd and anyway the acoustics are not great. And unsurprisingly, of course, the impact on the workplace that has happened is that now there are more collaborative spaces, right? Because there's less desks, there's less workstations. They're all unassigned, and there's more collaborative spaces. But most of us are still spending at least half of our time working alone. That might change, right? So again, not a fortune teller, right? It's just a snapshot in time. It might change how much time we spend alone or together. But at the moment, too quickly into the McKinsey thing that I mentioned, at the moment, this is the situation, right? So it becomes a slightly less surprising why people are saying, I do want the option, right? Because I need the office for a whole bunch of stuff, right? It's just that it's not doing it for me at the moment, which is why I still prefer to be at home. But I'd come, right, if potentially all of these changes actually happen. This is what I was mentioning before, that so it's not just our research, but there's a pretty big contrast between what McKinsey is saying, and it's, okay, I need to check if in 2021 they redid it, but employers think that the ability to work remotely and salary is actually a bit more important than people actually think it is. So naturally what happens is that as an employer, you will give more remote work days, respectively more income, because that's what you think will make the difference. And whereas, of course, it does to a certain extent, it does create has the risk of creating a very transactional relationship. Whereas what you need, again, to innovate and to solve problems for your organization is trust, and for that you need social capital, et cetera. So there is an intrinsic risk to only tapping on things that have to do with ability to work remotely and compensation, as opposed to thinking about the experience as a whole. So in the afternoon session, I'll talk a little bit about how potentially you can start thinking, because the solution will be very different for each of you, on how to resolve the tensions. So they're design tensions, right? They're not contradictions between, okay, we want transparency because we need the trust, we miss the connection, but we also want a lever of ownership. We want to be connected, but we also want the option to be private, et cetera, et cetera. I think the equitable versus equal experience, that's a whole conversation in itself that I won't touch upon today. But that's where I will leave you almost before lunch. That definitely we need to come together to achieve generative things. Even the Beatles knew that, even though too late. So I hope that you'll also join me at 2 to talk about more practical things that you can do. Thank you.